Okay, hi. So in this video we're going to take a look at reproduction. Now, importantly, there are two different types of reproduction, which are sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Asexual. Now, the reason why reproduction is so important is because this is when genetic variation is going to occur. So all the things we've spoke about previously, so adaptation to different environments and things like that, that cannot occur if reproduction did not exist, because we can't have our adaptations actually manifest themselves in a new organism unless we reproduce. Now, asexual reproduction occurs with no sexual intercourse. And that is because there is only one parent. One parent. Okay, so it sounds very weird. Obviously, humans cannot reproduce by asexual reproduction. But many microorganisms do. So things like bacteria will reproduce asexually. And this means there is little to no variation. So we say no variation. In reality, there is a tiny amount of variation. But that's something that you would learn at A level. So there's no variation in offspring. In the offspring. So really what that means is you are producing clones. So when the parent, let's just say a bacteria, so the bacteria might look something like this. It's got a tail and it's got a nucleus. If that bacteria reproduces, what is going to be produced is another one. Another one which is going to look exactly the same. So reproduction asexually produces a clone which is genetically and physically identical to the parent. Now, although it happens in bacteria, a lot of plants can reproduce asexually as well. And this means that many plants, especially for farming, are clones. So if let's say, for example, we produce a crop which has all the characteristics we want. So it's brightly coloured, so it looks attractive, it's really big, and so obviously it can be sold for a high price, it's good quality. If we can clone that plant, then obviously that is going to make us a lot of money. And so it's useful that we can clone plants in that way. All of our cells in our body, well, most of our cells in our body anyway, so we're not talking about sperm and egg here, when they need to reproduce, they reproduce asexually. So I said that as an organism, humans obviously cannot reproduce asexually. We can't produce clones of ourselves, and that's absolutely true. However, we can reproduce all of our cells, and that's why when you get a cut, eventually you'll have skin reform over that cut, and that skin has actually been formed by asexual reproduction of some of your cells. So your cells will just split up into two, and those two copies will be the same as the original skin cell. So that's different. We're not talking about an organism reproducing, we're talking about cells reproducing there. So very different. Now, how do we reproduce? Well, obviously we take part in sexual reproduction. Now, sexual reproduction is of course male plus female sex cells. And remember from the last video, a sex cell is known as a gamete. So, gametes. And the gametes in this case, of course, are sperm and egg. Now, this means that we are getting genetic information from the mother and from the father, which means that we are introducing variation. A child, a human child, is not a clone of its mother or its father. The human child is going to be an individual with some of the characteristics inherited from the mother and some from the father. Many plants also undergo sexual reproduction, and rather than sperm and egg, they use things called ovules and pollen. So pollination is an example of sexual reproduction. So you remember in the previous videos when we spoke about bees and how they're becoming extinct, or their numbers are dropping in the UK? Well, that's a problem because bees allow plants to have sex. So it sounds pretty weird, but they are actually pollinating other plants, and that is how the plants sexually reproduce. And so why is this variation in sexual reproduction so important? Well, it can lead to Adaptations, and it can even eventually lead to new species. We'll have a look at that later on when we go into Darwin's theory. But because variation allows survival of the fittest, it means that an adaptation which is passed down by sexual reproduction can give rise to the next generation being better adapted to their environment. So to see the power of sexual reproduction, all you need to do is take a look at yourself in the mirror and then have a look at your mum and have a look at your dad. If you can see characteristics which you obtain from your mother and from your father, you will see that, for example, if your father has blue eyes and your mother has brown eyes, and you've got brown eyes, you've inherited that characteristic from your mother. Whereas if your earlobes are attached, and so are your father's, but your mother's are not, then you will have inherited that characteristic from your father. So it is like taking characteristics from both parents and mixing them up, and you get you. And that is why we are all genetically different, unless you're talking about fully identical twins. And fully identical twins are identical because when they are reproducing, sperm and egg fertilize, and then the zygote, which is the sperm plus the egg, so once the fertilization has occurred, that splits into by asexual reproduction. So you get two clones of the same fertilized egg, which then lead to two clones which are the identical twins. Okay, so I hope that's helped. That's just a brief introduction to reproduction. But if you do have any questions, please do feel free to comment them in the box below or use the link to send me a direct email. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.